From a young age, we are taught to fear that which no one dares to speak of openly, not because we don't know it, but because we feel. Behind these words lies something too vast, too ancient, too unfathomable for the human mind. And so we hide this fear behind black clothes, the silence at funerals, the customary phrases, as if hoping that if we don't name it, it will pass us by. Death is spoken of either in whispers or in quotes, as if it were not a part of our reality, but a distant abstraction, a random exception that, of course, affects everyone, but at the same time, somehow never really touches you. At least, not until it comes into your home, into your heart, into your life. And when it does happen, when you lose someone you loved, someone you knew, someone you shared time and air with, you are not given time to understand, to process, to grieve. You are rushed, comforted. The coffin is closed, as if you are meant to accept it all without asking, where does everything that made this person alive go? Their thoughts, their laughter, their warmth. But if you stay alone with this pain, if you don't drown it out with conversations and busyness, if you allow yourself to be silent and just listen, a strange, unsettling, yet compelling question begins to resonate within you, not with the voice of the mind, but with something ancient, intuitive, forgotten. What if everything we've been told about death is a lie, or at least not the whole truth? What if death is not an abyss, not emptiness, not the final period in the sentence of life, but something much subtler than words, much softer than fear, and much deeper than any dogma that humanity has been forced to accept for centuries? What if it's not a period, but a comma, not darkness, but blinding light? A light we just can't see because our eyes are closed. What if death is not the end of the road, but merely a bend in the path, after which another space begins, with different laws, a different density, a place where the need for the body falls away, where time folds in on itself, where thought becomes movement and feeling becomes reality? We are used to thinking of it as destruction, as loss, as something that takes away from us. But what if it doesn't take, but gives back? Doesn't close, but opens? Doesn't erase, but recalls? After all, even the sunset is not the death of the sun, but its departure beyond the visible horizon to illuminate what we cannot see. But what still exists, pulses, lives its mysterious life. Maybe death is just such a boundary, not between being and non-being, but between forms of life, between ways of existing, between levels of consciousness, one of which we have forgotten, but still yearn for in the stillness of the night. We don't fear death itself. We fear what we cannot control, what we cannot measure, what we cannot return to. We fear becoming nothing, becoming an empty space, a forgotten name, as if our worth ends with our breath. But breath itself does not make us alive, just as its absence does not make us disappear. How can a thought disappear if it has no form? How can love die if it cannot be measured? How can energy cease if by its nature it is eternal? Does the wind disappear when it becomes still? Does sound disappear if the ear cannot hear it? Does the river cease to exist when it is hidden beneath the ice? And so we are. Perhaps death does not destroy us, but simply transforms us into another state, where perception changes, where time breaks apart, where we become what we have always been, without masks, without fear, without boundaries. And if at some moment you fall silent, freeze, listen to this great, ancient, ringing silence. Perhaps you will suddenly understand that death was never the end. It is the beginning of a return. If you stop, if you break free, even for a moment, from the endless rush, from the usual hustle, from the anxiety that prevents us from thinking about the eternal, and simply look at the world, not through the eyes of a tired person, but as if for the first time, you might notice one astonishing truth. Nothing in this world truly disappears. Nothing vanishes without a trace. Nothing dies in the full sense of the word. It only changes form, density, speed, and direction. Every drop of water, evaporating under the sun, becomes steam, rises into the sky, transforms into a cloud, then into rain, falls back to earth, seeps into the soil, enters the roots of a tree, becomes sap, moves along branches, turns into a leaf, which then falls, decays, becomes part of the earth, part of the world. And so it continues endlessly, without a single disappearance, without a rupture, without a final point. Everything lives, everything passes, everything transforms, everything returns. And we are part of this great cycle. We are inseparable from matter, inseparable from nature. And if every cloud, every leaf, every speck of dust continues its journey in a new form, then why should we, beings filled with consciousness, feelings, memory, pain, hope, suddenly disappear in a single, insignificant second? The scientific world, far from mysticism, faith, and religion, has long since acknowledged energy does not disappear. Under no circumstances, it may contract, break apart, scatter, turn into heat, movement, light, sound, vibration, a field, a particle, but it does not die, never. This is one of the fundamental laws of the universe. And if you and I, if we are not just bodies, not just a collection of biological reactions, but something more, something that can love, dream, remember, feel another's pain, see dreams, cry to music, freeze in the presence of beauty, how can all this simply end forever? Just because the heart stops beating. Think about what a thought is. What is a feeling? Where does it arise? Where does it end? Where is it stored? They don't weigh anything. You can't put them on a table, cut them, measure them with a ruler. They don't have form, but they are real. You can't see them with your eyes, but they change lives, destinies, entire eras. This means that if feelings and thoughts are something immaterial, yet powerful, they already exist in another dimension, beyond flesh, in that very space that does not disappear with the death of the body. And if consciousness is not a byproduct of the brain's activity, as long believed, but a separate, independent structure that simply uses the body as a tool, as a temporary form for experience, then death becomes not an end, but a disconnection. Soft, frightening, incomprehensible, but still a disconnection, not destruction. Imagine a radio. While it works, we hear music. If the radio breaks, the music stops in the room, but that doesn't mean the wave itself disappears. The signal still passes through the air. It's just no longer caught by the device. Perhaps it's the same with death. The body is the receiver. Consciousness is the wave. And when the receiver is turned off, consciousness continues to play, just in another room, in another dimension, where we are not yet able to listen. And when you allow yourself to believe in this possibility, when you don't even believe, but simply allow the thought that it might be true, everything starts to sound different. Death becomes not an enemy, not an abyss, not darkness, but a transition, a transformation, a return, a flowing into a new form that we are not yet capable of comprehending because we only think in terms of the flesh. But the soul feels more. The soul remembers. The soul knows, even if the mind resists. And if there is something in us that is not subject to destruction, something that doesn't fade with the death of the body, then we are eternal. Not in the body, not in the name, not in the biography, but in essence, in light, in energy that never dies. And perhaps all we need is to stop running from this thought, to stop, close our eyes, and remember, there are boundaries beyond which words do not pass, boundaries where logic loses its power, and language, no matter how rich, becomes helpless, as if it has lost its voice, because it tries to describe something that cannot fit into any form, any definition, or any human understanding. It begins where ordinary experience stops working, where time loses its direction, where the body becomes unnecessary and consciousness becomes infinite, light, fluid, as if you had taken off heavy clothing and suddenly realized that all this time you were wearing someone else's skin. This is what those who have been there say. Those who were on the edge, who heard their heart stop, their breath fade, who experienced silence, not external silence, but inner silence, deep, almost luminous. And it is in this silence that something not empty, as we fear, is revealed, but something full, alive, loving. Hundreds and thousands of people who have experienced clinical death say the same thing. The sensation of floating above their body and seeing it as an object, but not being afraid, not worrying, because what you were has not disappeared, but has become free, light, infinitely conscious. They speak of a light that cannot be compared to anything earthly. It neither burns nor blinds, but penetrates to the very heart of your being, and you suddenly understand that this light is something alive, something intelligent, as if everything that has ever been, is, and will be, has gathered into one limitless point, in which you dissolve, and at the same time, truly become yourself. They describe love that cannot be compared to human love, because it does not demand, it does not hold, it does not judge, it does not impose conditions. It simply embraces you from within, completely, without remainder, and in this embrace, you feel for the first time. You were always awaited, always known, always loved. Some describe how they were shown their entire life, not as a collection of events, but as a flow of meanings, causes, and effects, where every word, every choice, every silence was connected with all the other threads. And in this vast, incredible clarity, you suddenly understand why you lived the way you did. And all of this is accompanied by silence, not dead, but resonant. A silence in which there is no fear, no time, no pain, but only understanding. But then something calls them back, softly but persistently, and they return, even though they do not want to, because they know there is home, and here is the journey. They wake up, regain consciousness, open their eyes, and realize that now the world around them is the same, but they are different. No longer afraid of death, no longer chasing the unnecessary, no longer forgetting who they are. And the most astonishing thing is that all of them, regardless of age, gender, culture, and faith, speak of the same thing, with the same words, the same images, as if beyond the boundary, we all share the same memory, the same source, the same light. And we can doubt, argue, explain this with brain chemistry, hallucinations, or dreams. But inside, something still trembles when we listen to them, as if we are recognizing ourselves, as if we've already been there, as if we are not only here. Among the many ancient teachings scattered across the world, there is one common intuitive feeling that has permeated through centuries, cultures, legends, and meditations. The feeling that the soul, upon leaving the body, does not disappear, does not sink into emptiness, does not dissolve into nothingness, but transitions into a special state, into a space between worlds, where there is no need to fight, no need to play roles, no need to prove anything, because there, time does not exist, only pure being, not fear, but calm knowledge, not identity, but essence. This state is unlike our familiar world. It has no beginning or end, no familiar coordinates. But everyone who has touched this space, even for a moment, in dreams, meditative revelations, near-death experiences, or deep spiritual insights, speaks of one thing. There is clarity, a crystal clear, warm, all-pervading clarity in which all questions disappear, because in it live all the answers. They describe this space as a field, a hall, a light, an embrace, a recollection that does not come from the outside, but is born from within, as if you suddenly step out of the veil of oblivion and realize not only who you are, but who you were, who you will be, and why you chose this path, this life, these lessons, even if they seem too heavy, even if you curse them, forgetting that you yourself assigned them to you. There, between lives, we do not lose ourselves. On the contrary, we fully become ourselves for the first time, not limited by the body, not compressed by time, not attached to a name, but as beings of light and experience, who with infinite compassion look upon the life just lived, not judging it, but learning from it, gently turning the pages of events as if they were a book, and asking themselves one single question: what have I learned? And what do I want to experience now to come closer to my true self? And in this clarity, as those who recall this state say, arises the desire to return, not because you are forced, not because someone demands it, but because you feel there is still a knot that has not been untied. There is still a feeling that has not been lived. There is still a lesson waiting, like a forgotten road you once promised yourself to walk. This is how lives are chosen. This is how the threads of fate stretch. This is how souls intertwine, coming into the same life not by accident, but because deep down, behind the veil of time, they have already agreed to meet. As mother and daughter, as enemy and savior, as teacher and student, as a passing stranger who will say just the right word, not the one you expected, but the one you needed. Perhaps this is why we feel an instant closeness to some people. When you meet someone, and inside everything says, I know you, even though reason insists you've never crossed paths before, because the soul recognizes earlier than language finds the words. Perhaps this is why we have inexplicable fears, phobias, attractions, strange feelings toward places, smells, landscapes we have never seen, but which evoke such an acute sense of home, as if we have already been there. Not in this life, but once. Maybe this is why some children suddenly talk about their past families, about homes that no longer exist, about events that can be verified, and everything matches down to the smallest detail. Because memory between lives does not disappear. It just quiets down, like a closed door that sometimes cracks open by chance. A glance, a smell, a dream, or a sudden feeling that you have already lived this. And if this memory exists, even fragmentarily, even beyond awareness, then death itself ceases to be the last word, because life is not a book with a final page. It is a cycle. It is breath. It is a spiral that returns, but on a different level, with a new understanding, with a new light. And then every moment, even the hardest, the most confusing, the one that seems perhaps meaningless, takes on a different dimension, because maybe it is this moment that you once chose yourself, before birth, before a name, as a point of awakening, as a turn, as an opportunity to remember who you truly are. And perhaps it is in these rare moments of silence, when a strange longing suddenly hits, a strange, bright sadness that cannot be explained, that this is not loneliness and not fear, but an echo of that very memory, that very silence between lives, that inner light to which we will one day return. We can argue endlessly, propose hypotheses, dismiss things, smile skeptically, seek scientific explanations, talk about neurochemical releases in the dying brain, attribute everything to hallucinations, fear, or the desire to believe in immortality. And still, deep inside, where logic and arguments no longer have power, there remains a strange, almost unsettling feeling that we don't know the whole picture, and perhaps we never have. Because if death is not the end, if beyond the last breath there is not emptiness, but a transition, if the soul truly does not die, but simply returns to where it came from, if energy does not disappear, but transforms, if consciousness is not a product of the brain, but a stream that temporarily uses the body as a receiver, then inevitably, the question arises, one that you both want to distance yourself from and draw closer to. What if someone has already returned? What if not everything ends the moment the heart stops beating, but rather, something begins, something that, in its depth and scale, goes beyond our earthly concepts. And there are those who have already crossed over and back. There are children, too small to lie, too sincere to fantasize with such detail. They speak of past lives, other parents, other cities, names, the circumstances of their death, and their words can be verified, and they match frighteningly precisely, as if in these little bodies resides an experience older than our century. There are people who have gone through clinical death, seen things that cannot be explained by science, heard conversations happening in other rooms, behind closed doors, at the moment when their body was considered dead, and everything they later described turned out to be true, confirmed by witnesses, facts, small details they couldn't possibly have known. They don't talk about dreams, hallucinations, or visions, but about a reality, a different, clearer, fuller, brighter reality than anything they have ever known. And when they return, they carry this memory, not as a fantasy, but as a secret knowledge that changes everything. Their relationship with life, with people, with the very concept of time. There are those who have experienced spontaneous memories, regressions, deep meditative journeys, and what they saw, felt, and remembered repeats the same images: transition, light, love, meeting, choice, return, as if across all cultures, all languages, all eras, people describe the same path, just with different words, to different degrees of clarity. They return different, not with a message, not with truth, not with the goal of changing the world, but simply with a different perspective, a different heart, a different inner light that no longer fades, because once it illuminated them from within, and since then, they cannot forget. They become quieter, more attentive, gentler. They listen as if every word is the breath of life. They look as if they see in you something more than your face, name, or voice. As if they have come to understand that nothing is accidental and no one enters your life by chance. They rarely speak of it directly, because the world is not always ready to listen, because the truth they carry is too raw, too tender, too powerful, and if it's spoken at the wrong moment, to the wrong person, it may cause mockery, fear, rejection. And yet, they are near. They are among us. Not angels, not saints, not heroes, just people who once crossed that boundary we call death and returned different. Maybe it's them you happen to meet on a train, in a hospital, in a queue, and they say something simple, but in that simplicity, you suddenly hear something more than just meaning, as if it's the voice of memory, the voice of truth, a voice that doesn't come from the outside, but wakes up from within. And maybe you, right now, are reading this, not because you randomly stumbled upon it, not because you're interested in the subject, but because deep inside, the same strange, quiet, familiar call has already begun to resonate. Because if there are those who have already returned, then there are also those who must remember. And if someone remembers, it means the veil is beginning to lift. And then death ceases to be the end, becoming just the next step. And life, a possibility, a vast, unfathomable, precious possibility to understand something, to complete something, to meet someone, to remember yourself. And maybe, at this very moment, you are approaching that very boundary where there is no longer fear, but awakening,